Bundys Garage, Bundy here. What's up, my fellow YouTubers? If you're trying to fix your car, this is the place to be. Doing the rocker arms on this Honda J Series V6. This is on a 3.5 liter. This will work on a 3.0s, 3.5s, 3.7s. Was it 3.2? I think I'm missing your Accords, Odysseys, Pilots. And the reason you would do this is if you wanted to change out your springs, or if your valve stem seal was bad, you would want to do this. I'll also put a link in the description below where there's a kit on eBay that'll actually allow you to change out the springs and the oil tube seals without taking the heads off this engine. So let's get started. So right there, just taking the screws off the top cover. Just showed you the underside of the top cover. Right here I'm working on an evap. There's a little like an evap system, little evap solenoid that sits there. It's held on by two 10mm bolts or screws, nuts, which I just showed right there. Just working that hose off. Got a pair of needle nose pliers, and if you need to, just grab the hose and give a little gentle push, or you might need to twist it back and forth with the pliers to get it loose. It's not really that hard. You just got to take off the upper intake plenum, upper intake manifold. I took off the throttle body. There's just two bolts and two nuts that hold that thing on, so I can leave all the coolant lines and all that stuff on it as well. Right there is a Icon ratchet I got from Harbor Freight. I really like it. The only thing I wish I had done is gotten the one that has the swivel head, or the head that articulates back and forward. Wish I had gotten that one instead. So there you can see I have the intake off, just showing you the underside as well. There's a gasket that goes in between the, I don't want to call them intake runners, but it's where the air gets sucked down into the intake. If that thing's not cracked, if it looks like it's in good condition, go ahead and reuse it. I reuse mine all the time. It's metal. It's like a multi-layered steel gasket, kind of like a head gasket. So if it's not ripped or torn or doesn't look really bad in shape, go ahead and reuse it. I stuck some old gloves and an old towel down there just so nothing falls down, because that leads right down into your cylinder. So anything you lose down there is going into your piston, and you don't want that to happen at all. So just make sure you cover it, put a towel, you can put some tape over it. Here I'm just working out the valve cover. There's 5 10mm bolts that hold the valve cover on. That's on the front and the back. There are torque specs for this, for the valve cover when you put it back on. I always just snug them down because there's a shaft or a shank on it, and the shank will basically bottom out when the bolt's done going down as far as it can go. So valve cover and the oil tube seals, always make sure you use a good quality gasket. If you can, pick up one from Honda or Acura, or if all else fails, you can also go to rockauto.com and pick up a Beck Arnley one. Try to stay away from Felpro. I've had nothing but problems with the Felpro one. They seem to leak after like 30,000 miles. There's a couple bolts that hold the wiring harness onto the top of the valve cover, and near kind of to the driver's side, there's a bolt that holds on a, I'm just showing you the bolts there. On the driver's side, there's a little bolt that holds on the wiring harness, like a clip on the wiring harness, so you need to take that off as well to get enough room to sneak the valve cover out. So here I'm working on the rocker arms, the intake and the exhaust. Obviously the intake is towards the middle of the engine. Exhaust is on the outside where the catalytic converters sit. These are 12mm bolts, if I'm not mistaken. And the really cool thing that Honda did on these intake and exhaust bolts, they put an EX on the exhaust, they put an IN on the intake, so you can't get them messed up. So to do the valve adjustment on this engine, you have a little 10mm bolt and a little screw. I loosened up all the bolts and backed off all the screws that allow you to do the valve intake, so that way there's no pressure on the springs or from the springs onto the rocker arms. And I did that on both the exhaust and the intake, so that way when I take off the main bolts right through the center, there's no pressure on it, and then all your valves are closed as well when this happens, because the springs are obviously pushing them up. So just work that out. There's little springs down below the rocker arm rod, and that's just pushing up on the rocker arms themselves. You'll see it. It's like a 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch spring. Just grab those and place them to the side. Just make note of which way they go in. And like I said earlier, the reason I'm doing this is to change out the valve stem seals without taking the head off on the engine. So there's the little spring I was telling you about. Just make note of which way that goes, which way's up, which way's down. So it's the same process for the exhaust. Just working those out, slowly working them out. But I'll put up a torque spec for the intake and the exhaust bolts. So when you guys go to put it back together again, you know exactly how to torque it. But yeah, check the description below. I'll put some other links to other J-Series videos that I have, like timing belts and spark plugs and oil tube seals and valve gaskets. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and email me at bundysgarage@gmail.com. I love answering you guys' questions. If you need help with this, you know, we're all in this together. So if you guys need help, let me know, and I hope this helped you out.